For most of my childhood, I maintained a zero-tolerance policy for real people on television. I didn't want family sitcoms or humans with complicated feelings. I wanted a reality made of bursting ink and paint. To me, humans were slow and predictable. Drawings were the only acceptable medium. If a show wasn't rendered in two-dimensional absurdity, I simply refused to watch it. While I watched the standard hits like SpongeBob and Jimmy Neutron, they eventually felt too safe. My viewing habits drifted toward the obscure and the intensely random, seeking out whatever weirdness was very deep in the cable lineup. Extreme cartoon surrealism offered an active escape. It was a way to bypass the boring physical limitations of the everyday world. I spent years in a phase where randomness functioned as the primary metric for comedy. Logic didn't matter. The appeal was entirely based on how little sense a show made. Super Robot Monkey Team Hyperforce Go was the peak of this era. It took the Power Rangers, turned them into monkeys, and then made those monkeys robots. For a kid, that's a perfect psychological hook. I couldn't tell you the plot of a single episode today. The storylines are gone, but the chaotic energy and the specific character designs of the toys I owned are permanently burned into my memory. My connection to these shows isn't about the quality of the storytelling. It's about the high-speed momentum of these mismatched concepts slamming together. These obscure shows survived by breaking the traditional rules of television. Chalk Zone was built on the idea that drawing a portal on the ground could lead to a dimension made of every erased sketch in history. The episodes would frequently veer off into confusing territory, ending with a random music video performed by the characters that had nothing to do with the actual plot. Chowder took this even further by aggressively leaning into fourth wall breaks. The characters would acknowledge they were in a cartoon and manipulate the screen itself to solve their problems. They once ran out of animation budget mid-episode, forcing the voice actors to host a car wash to raise the money needed to finish the animation for the final scenes. This kind of structural subversion hooks a child because it feels like a private joke. It's a meta-level layer of humor that seems invisible to the adult world. By middle school, most of the kids around me were moving on. They outgrew surreal cartoons and started talking about mainstream adult animation, leaving me isolated in my weird niche. That cultural gap only intensified my focus. I funneled all my attention into a single obscure Gothic property about creepy twins, Edgar and Ellen. This became an all-consuming interest. I spent hours on the website's flash games, read every book in the series, and obsessed over the towering Halloween displays at Target. This reached a peak of uncritical hype when they announced Edgar and Ellen was getting a full-fledged animated series. It was exactly what I wanted. Childhood fandom is rarely a casual hobby. It's an immersive, isolating obsession that sets a high bar for whatever comes next. Then comes the crash. Rewatching these romanticized shows through a mature lens often leads to a surprising perspective shift. Look at the sitcom 16. I remembered it as a classic, but rewatching it reveals a cast of characters who spend their entire lives trapped inside a mall, acting out a series of cringe-inducing tropes. The conflicts are entirely contrived. Instead of having a 10-second conversation, characters solve their problems by putting on absurd disguises and lying to everyone they know. Even the Edgar and Ellen show I waited years for doesn't hold up. The animation is visibly flat and the movement is stiff. It was clearly produced on a tight budget using basic Flash software. This realization is part of the process. It's the moment you notice that your childhood memories are tied to media that was often budget-constrained and poorly executed. There was one final blow to the illusion. Charles Ogden, the author of the Edgar and Ellen books and my personal childhood hero, doesn't actually exist. The name was a syndicate pen name. It was a manufactured brand used to cover for a rotating group of anonymous writers producing content on a schedule. Even with the corporate branding and the cheap animation, my affection for the show hasn't changed. The nostalgia remains, despite the facts. The lasting value of these shows is found in their flaws. Their unrefined, broken nature was the exact fuel my developing imagination needed at the time.